You're listening to The Greater Loop, a podcast from the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. In each episode, we bring to you leaders who connect Houston to the world, from business to diplomacy, innovation to impact. This is where global conversation begins. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to The Greater Loop, a podcast of the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. My name is Marianne Maldonado, and today our guest is Ambassador Roger D. Carstens. He's the former U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. And today we're going to talk about some of his most high-profile cases over the recent years and how the U.S. government approaches hostage cases and what the family experiences are behind the scenes and what communities can learn from these crises. Ambassador, welcome.
Marianne, thanks for having me on today. Looking forward to chatting.
It's our pleasure. And we look forward to hosting you in Houston next week. But before we get to that, let's talk about situations. There's so much happening in the world right now. We hear about missing persons. We hear about high-profile missing persons. Maybe you could start out with what, from your perspective, would be synergies that would exist in a hostage situation on the federal side, as well as kind of the personal side of life?
Yeah, sure. Great question. You're probably maybe trying to tie in what's happening right now in Arizona with Ms. Guthrie's case. I think some of the differences are actually quite notable. I think on the federal side, as you said, if you're trying to negotiate with a hostile state like for the Russians or the Iranians, or you're trying to talk to a terrorist group, you actually do have to follow a different guideline or a different way of doing business. On the hostage for ransom side of the house, which is what usually happens in a place where, in the United States, some bad guys come in, they take someone hostage, they send a hostage note, they want X amount of dollars in order to release someone. It's actually something that you can train to. They have task condition standards. You can train FBI and police hostage negotiators. There's kind of a playbook for how things are done. And I think both sides at times realize this. Even the bad guys will be aware that there's kind of a federal playbook and they kind of can play off each other as they go down through their negotiations. When I took this job many years ago, I went and talked to the two people who had it before me. Jim O'Brien, who had it under President Obama, and Robert, who had it before I did. And in talking to both Jim and Robert, they both stressed that there's no playbook, that you pretty much have to take every case tabula rasa and figure out what you're going to try to do, because a nation state does not necessarily follow the same rules as the bad guys in a kidnapping for ransom, and nor do they follow the same rules when terrorists actually take a person. So there are different things that you have to do. In a way, there's a little more of a rule book to play by in Ms. Guthrie's case, versus when we were trying to, say, negotiate for Brittney Griner, we actually had to just kind of make it up on the fly. And I'm really grateful for Jim O'Brien and Robert O'Brien for giving me that critical piece of advice. But to be very candid, I didn't believe them. When Jim and Robert both told me that there was no playbook, I sought to create that playbook. And only after I had the job for 2 years did I realize that they're right. When you're dealing with nation states and terrorist groups, you really almost have to start tabula rasa and just figure it out.
You talked about Brittney Griner. We have the Olympics going on. Maybe you could tell us a couple of high-profile cases that might be interesting to the audience.
I mean, Brittney Griner's case was, probably the most high-profile one. That and maybe Evan Gershkovich from the Wall Street Journal. I think with, one thing I always point out with Brittney Griner's case, a lot of people felt that, we only take cases and throw our efforts in to cases where people might be famous, might be connected, might know Congressman so-and-so, or might be high profile. And the truth of the matter is, during my time working for President Trump and President Biden, I helped participate in bringing 65 people back, Americans, a few people that were not Americans, of course. But in those 65 people, I'd say 2 or 3 were famous. The other 60 plus weren't famous, did not know anyone, were not rich, did not have their congressman on speed dial. But the United States of America owes our best efforts, even if you're not wealthy and are not connected. When you're wrongfully detained or taken by a terrorist group, we owe you our best efforts. I think in Brittney's case, it highlights the fact that it's a team effort. It's a whole of government effort. We had a saying in my office that I don't care who comes up with the plan, who negotiates, or who gets the credit, as long as the job gets done. And I think the Brittney Griner case and then the bigger swap that took place about a year later, where we traded a ton of people to get Americans back that were being held in Russia. That's one where the CIA played a very powerful role. Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, played a very powerful role. The president, of course, but also congressmen, senators, people at the Department of Justice, the White House, I would say nonprofits, NGOs, and also I'd say super empowered individuals like Governor Bill Richardson. It really is a team effort to bring someone home. And you take a look like Brittney Griner's case, literally probably 1,000 people put time and effort into bringing her home. And if you pull just one person out of that stack of 1,000, it might not happen. It just might not happen.
What's the criteria that the government looks at for actioning or non-actioning?
There's a list that, in a way, that was given to us by Congress, criteria. And in 2020, Congress passed something called the Levinson Act, so named after our longest held hostage, Robert Levinson, who was taken by the Iranians many years ago. And in this act, they actually gave us 11 criteria that would help us decide whether someone is being wrongfully detained. Now, there are two categories. Wrongfully detained means that a nation state has taken an American citizen, like Russia or Iran, for example. A hostage is someone that a terrorist group like Al-Qaeda or ISIS is taking and squirreling away. But in these cases, we now have criteria where the Secretary of State can kind of look down a big, broad list and decide whether that person is wrongfully detained or not. And on the hostage side, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has criteria to help them identify a hostage case. And once it kind of crests a certain amount of criteria, that's kind of like the totality of the circumstances, and the Secretary of State makes a declaration, that case then moves from consular affairs in the Department of State over to the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, my former office. And now it's my job, or was my job, to go and negotiate for their return.
So much has happened over the past 10 years in terms of AI and electronic communication. Could you tell us a little bit about that? I could envision that it has totally changed from how you would action things 10 years ago.
I would actually, let me shock you and say no.
Really?
I'm always mindful of that story about the wealthy guy, Croesus, back in what was Turkey, back in the olden days. And he's trying to decide whether to go to war with the Persians. And so he sends a diplomat over to talk to, you can almost say the witches that would give answers back then. And that person goes to the temple at Delphi and asks the Pythia, he says, should I go to war against the Persians? And the Pythia responds, if Croesus goes to war against the Persians, a wealthy nation will fall. So Croesus gets that information, decides, well, I'm good to go. He attacks the Persians. And what he didn't realize is that the Pythia was trying to give him a warning that the wealthy nation that would fall was his own. So what is that? How does that translate into nowadays? It translates because AI, hey, thanks for all the information. But now I as a human have to get on the ground and go build a relationship with a dictator or a terrorist group, people who might have stolen an election or killed their way to the top, people that didn't go to Harvard, didn't go to the Sorbonne, didn't go to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, but they're good leaders. They're tough leaders. They're very, in a way, primal in their dealings with people. And now I have to talk with that person, possibly build a relationship and figure out a way that's going to convince them to let an American go, someone that they're holding as hostage. And I would say AI can maybe map out a strategy here and there. I'd say the internet can map it out. But at the end of the day, you're building human relationships. And I think it'd almost be more important to tap into something that most of us don't tap into anymore. And that's our intuition. You must do all the mathematics. You have to gather all the facts possible on your opponent and how you're going to make things happen. But the second you walk into a negotiation room, you're probably well advised to flip a switch and start trying to feel the room, read the room, understand what the vibe is, and try to build that relationship. And the mathematics don't help at that point. Look, if you're going to put a spaceship on Mars, by all means, do all the math you absolutely possibly do. If you're going to negotiate to get an American back, do all the preparation. I call it the mathematics. But once you step in the room, you have to tap into something that most of us didn't use from the time we left high school, and that is your intuition. And why don't we use it anymore? Because the older we get, we become more accountable. So can you imagine me telling Congress or a general officer when I was in the Army, well, sir, I decided to go right instead of left because it just felt like the right thing to do. They would fire me. You can't say that. So by the time you're in your 30s, you want to give an answer. Well, sir, I decided to go right because, and then you give a list of reasons in mathematics. But at the end of the day, we're all programmed to feel things and make decisions. And I'm not trying to get too touchy-feely, but in a way you have to do both. You have to do your mathematics and your preparation up front. But I'm telling you, when you talk to a terrorist group or you talk to a dictator, if you're not trying to tap into that instinctual thing that we were given from back in the olden days and start to read the room and build those relationships, then all the AI in the world is not going to help you.
And often the public sees things maybe that have already occurred. What do we not know about what actually happens leading up? You talked about the mathematics, the preparation, the intuition. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, a lot of preparation goes in. And in a way, if you really thought about it, you can figure, the CIA is going to give intelligence briefs. We're going to go meet and talk to the bad guys. And so everyone kind of expects that. But maybe the thing that they don't know that happens is the amount of work that we do talking to the families and partnering with the families and getting advice from people that you probably wouldn't even think to. Going to a senator or a congressman, asking what they think about how to get it done because they've met the dictator in their travels. Or going to a 17-year-old son of a man being held in Russia and saying, look, I'm in the government. I need help. When I go into the State Department every day and put in a suit and tie, I surrender 50% of my creativity. But you're a 17-year-old kid and you've been watching your dad's detention for a few years now. What am I missing here? And if you can be open to that experience and listen to people, you're going to start coming up with the right solutions. And I do have a case where a 14-year-old boy gave us the critical strategy that we pursued to victory because we just couldn't think like he was thinking about his father's detention. So what do people see that they don't? What do we do that they don't see? I'll say this much. When I took the job, I thought for certain that everything would be done in a smoke-filled back room where we did things secretly out of the microscope or out of the glare of the press. And what I found was there was this period of time where it started to actually become a very public thing. It's in the press, and you have to embrace that and accept that. And you have to accept the fact you're going to be on TV. Your case is going to be leaked at times. You're going to include Congress. You're going to include family members. And so what people don't really see is the amount of time and effort that we put into understanding the environment and also partnering with everyone we possibly can, from the family members, congressmen, senators, partner nations, like in one of our Russian cases with Norway, Germany, Turkey, Slovenia, Poland. The amount of work that goes into build this big weaving network in order to execute the strategy at the given moment to get that American back.
You talked about families. You talked about victory. I'm sure that the families are all looking for a successful return. What does success look like?
Boy, success looks like me having a sip of a 7-Eleven cup of coffee. I'm not getting promoted to I think, shill from my buddy, Joey DePinto, West Point classmate, is retiring after being the CEO of 7-Eleven down in Texas. Joey, I think it's in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but okay, now that I got a caffeine jolt, success is, I would say, in a way, twofold. It could be three or fourfold, but the things that matter to me, I wanted to see a hostage or a wrongful detainee walk down the gangplank of a plane, step onto American soil for the first time in years, perhaps, and fall into the arms of their loved one in a warm embrace of two people who haven't seen each other, talked to each other, or touched each other in years, perhaps. And it's so personal that, you almost want to avert your eyes. When a husband who's been held by the Russians for a few years, or someone held by 8 years by the Iranians, that embrace is so personal, but in a way you can't avert your eyes because it's such a human moment. And the other thing that I would say is success is when that person who's come back is successfully reintegrated into his life, not his former life. That thing sailed. Your former life is gone. You now have to integrate into a new life. And the U.S. government wants to help. They've taken many steps to try to ease that, to try to reintegrate people with their families and integrate them back into society. But that's when the real success takes place. At the geostrategic level, that's always hard to measure. It's a hostage situation, and I'd say a hostage situation, but a wrongful detention by a nation state like Russia or Iran. I mean, that's going to be one of thousands of factors between our relationship as a government with another government that might, in a way, be hostile towards us. But, I think you want to see that when we complete a swap trade or we get our people back, that we've not necessarily given our opponents a big edge, that we've been able to get our people back, but not been able also to make sure that we're controlling that bilateral relationship with the detention taker.
As we see with people who return from military action or PTSD or those type of things, I'm sure, as you mentioned, life does change for them. How can we as local communities, as institutions, as a society do better at supporting their reintegration?
I think the societies have a role to play. I think a lot of it's in a way non-societal, and that they've got to come back and we got to help them deal with the IRS, who's still taxing them even though they were in prison for 5 years. So we're working with the IRS so that they don't send a big tax bill and fine someone because they've not paid why haven't you paid your taxes in 5 years? Well, I've been in a prison. So we've worked through those issues. We've worked through PTSD issues with both family members and the person being held so that they get good medical treatment, good psychosocial help that's supported and paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. In terms of a community, it's really just that warm embrace. There was a time about 10, 15 years ago where if an American was taken in a place like Syria or Iran, first off, no one would know about it. Secondly, if we made a deal to get him back, most people would be poo-pawing it like, oh, we shouldn't be talking to terrorists. And I think now we realize that, we do talk to terrorists when we have to, when they've taken our citizens, and we do talk to hostile nation states. And the more that people understand that, the more they can be supportive of the president when he decides what he has to do to bring that person back. And we're almost kind of there. There was a time when really, if any president made a decision to bring an American home, they would be subjected to some severe scrutiny, usually negative, by Republicans and Democrats in the House, Senate, and in Minot, North Dakota, and in San Francisco, California. And nowadays, I think people look at it like, hey, we got Brittney Griner back, or we got Evan Gershkovich back, or we got person X or person Y. Good on you. They're our fellow citizens. I want them back. And we're willing to pay a price, whether it's a military raid, whether it's taking a bad convicted criminal, but we do the math and realize that person's not going to go back to his nation and cause great harm to America. And so we decide, okay, let's do a trade. Let's go ahead and swap it. And I think people are now more understanding of that, because at the end of the day, it's all fun and games until it's your daughter, your son, your husband, your wife, your best friend. When they're taken, you'll do anything possible to get them back. And when they're not yours, you start to become a little more critical. But I think we've done a good job, and we've tried to do a job of making sure that everyone felt like they're a part and a partner to getting people back, even if it's that car mechanic in Minot, North Dakota. If he's reading about this and has an opinion, well, you're part of the team now. Let's go get our citizens back.
Ambassador, you're now 5 years post this assignment. What was your greatest lesson or achievement or appreciation from that experience?
Man, I can't believe I don't have an answer ready off the top of my head. I've never really been asked that before. I think, learned a lot. But one big thing is it takes a team. I used to get embarrassed, like when a reporter would say, Roger, you've brought back 65 Americans. Now, stop. I didn't bring back 65 Americans. I was a part of a team. And I played a small role in getting 65 Americans to come back. But there are 1,000 unsung heroes in and out of the government in other countries and just all around the world, especially the family members that do the hard work to bring people home. We all play a role, and we all just have to execute it. And I'd say the second thing is when I took the job, I really didn't think much about intuition. Didn't think as much as I probably should have. And now that I've been in the job, I'm very conscious of when it's time to show up with the mathematical plan and when it's time to hit that button and go intuition and how best to merge them. I'm much more aware of when I need to be intuitive and when I need to be precise in mathematics.
Ambassador, I'm so looking forward to our conversation next week on the 24th here in Houston, Texas. Thank you again for joining us for today's podcast, and we look forward to seeing you all at our luncheon next week. Have a good day.
Marianne, I can't wait. It's going to be fun. Thank you.